possible and commence it at the earliest possible opportunity. And can I ask him what steps the Home Office is taking to ensure that the proposed new Chinese embassy in the Royal Mint site has proper oversight, and that we do not allow it to become a new base for spies?
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee for her questions, and I know that the Home Secretary looks forward to appearing in front of her committee tomorrow. She mentioned the embassy. I think she probably will know that the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government has called in the application in line with current planning policy. The planning decision sits solely with the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, the Deputy Prime Minister, and of course she will understand that I'm not able to say anything more about that, but a final decision will be made in due course. She also asked about FIRS. I can give her an assurance that we are progressing FIRS at pace. It is the government's strong intention to introduce FIRS as soon as practically possible, and to that end we intend to lay the regulations as soon as possible in the new year.
What?
The Home Secretary referred to sycophancy towards the Chinese. I think that charge is better directed at his own side. It's less than 5 years since Theresa May went to Beijing, and she was praised by the state media on that trip, and I know this because I was on that trip in a former career. She was praised for, quote, sidestepping human rights issues in the furtherance of the wider necessities of the trip. Does the Security Minister agree with me that that's not the right approach for the Chinese?
Mr. Speaker, I do agree. I don't think that that is the right approach. I think the current government's approach is the right one. I've laid out the strategic approach that we intend to adopt with China. We have to be clear-headed about the nature of the threat that we face, but of course we also have to look for areas where we can cooperate as well.
Thank you, Mr.
Speaker. Last year as Home Secretary I made the decision to exclude Yang Zhenbo from the UK because his presence posed a threat to our national security. That decision was based on the advice of MI5, and I'm very pleased that the High Court has upheld that decision. I say this gently to the Minister, but isn't it regrettable that it's taken a high-profile case, public outcry and opposition MPs dragging the Minister to the Chamber to finally get the government to commit to implementing the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme, a scheme that we enacted and that was ready to go at the time of the general election. Given the unprecedented threat posed by China, malicious cyber attacks, transnational repression, the Confucius Institutes, Chinese police stations, and of course the human rights abuses of the Uyghur Muslims, if the government's really serious about tackling the Chinese threat, when will it list China on the enhanced tier?
Minister?
Well, I wasn't going to make this point, but given the Right Honourable Lady has made her point in the way that she has, I will just gently point out that the previous government had a significant period of time from the passing of the national security. Well, the Right Honourable Lady shakes her head. It is a statement of fact to say that the previous government had a significant amount of time, many months, from the passing of the National Security Act, where they could have chosen to implement the first scheme. They didn't implement the first scheme. It now falls to this government to do so, and that is precisely what we will do.
Dun Aldridge.
Mr. Speaker, it's disappointing that some members opposite are trying to turn what should be a moment of collective unity in the face of a shared security threat into a political row instead. Does the Security Minister agree with me? It is pretty incredible for the party whose Defence Secretary was sacked for leaking vital intelligence information about the Huawei 5G contract to now pose as the protector of our country's national security.
Well, I'm grateful to him, and I agree. The approach of this government will always be to work constructively across the House on matters relating to national security. But given the record of certain Right Honourable and Honourable members opposite, I suggest perhaps humility might be the order of the day for some of them.
John Tugendar.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. Look, I don't want to go over this readiness of the first scheme again and again. I just leave it that I was assured by the same officials who sit in the box advising him that it was ready to go by the end of the year. Clearly the advice has changed. There's only one thing in the department that's changed, and that's the party leading it. So I can only assume that there's a change of intent. But I'm delighted that it will be ready to go by the summer. Better late than never. The real question, of course, is whether it will be worth having. And the advice from MI5 was very, very clear. If China isn't in the enhanced tier, it's not worth having. Will China be in that tier?
Thank you. Well, I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman. He knows that I take these matters incredibly seriously. He and I have known each other for a very long time, and therefore I know that he will take on trust my assertion to him and to the House that the scheme wasn't ready to go when we arrived in government in July of this year. We are working at pace. I've given a time frame for the House today, and I've also said that we're looking very carefully, very closely, working with colleagues across government to look at how we can best structure the scheme. And we'll make the announcements in the normal way in due course.
Joe Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One weak point in protecting our parliamentary democracy from hostile state actors is money in politics. Does the Security Minister agree with me that this latest case shows it's a priority to ensure our electoral laws are robust enough to ensure that only funds that are clean and sourced entirely from within the UK fund our political parties, because there seems to be some confusion, certainly from some of the parties opposite?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the honourable gentleman makes a very important point, and I know that he speaks with great authority on this matter. He will know very well that we've just appointed Baroness Hodge as the government's new anti-corruption champion, and she will be supporting the work that we do, looking very carefully at the impact that money, dirty money, has on politics. And he's absolutely right. This government will want to assure itself that the electoral laws that govern the conduct of elections are robust and ensure that there are not opportunities for people from overseas who seek to intervene in our political processes. It is a matter and advice that I think should be taken very seriously by all parties across this House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my Wimbledon constituency, there are many Hong Kongers deeply concerned about surveillance from Chinese agents in this country. Is the Minister able to give my constituents any assurance that their legitimate fears are being addressed by this government?
I'm grateful to him for raising the plight of his constituents. Yes, I am able to give him those assurances. The government takes the kind of interventions that he's referred to very, very seriously. Through the Defending Democracy Task Force, we are looking very carefully at the issue of transnational repression, and we will have more to say about it in due course.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Minister about the integrity of our democracy? And in particular, can I ask what steps he's taking to ensure the integrity of the processes and institutions of our political process, especially, but not only, with regards to China?
Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable gentleman makes a very important point. I mentioned briefly earlier on the importance that this government attaches to the Defending Democracy Task Force. This was a body that we inherited from the previous government. We are working at pace to ensure that it works as effectively across government as it possibly can. And fundamentally, it seeks to address the point he has made about challenging those threats to the integrity of our democracy. This government will ensure that no stone is left unturned in seeking to address these very significant challenges that we all know that we face.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Mr. Speaker, just a few days ago, the head of MI5 talked about having to make uncomfortable choices, and he talked about paring back counter-terrorism operations in order to deal with the huge rise in state threats. Now, if the government means what it says about security being the first priority of the government, will he undertake to make sure MI5 and the security services as a whole have the resources they need to tackle all the threats? And by all means, blame the previous government for the state we're in, but it won't get him very far, because I need him to answer that question.
I think the right honourable gentleman makes a fair point and a good challenge. And I can give him an assurance that the Home Secretary and I work incredibly closely with MI5 and with colleagues across government to make sure that they have the resources they need to do the very difficult job that they do. I mentioned the remarks that Ken McCallum had made in his annual threat lecture back in October. The nature of the threat that we face is more challenging, more complex than at any point during our lifetimes. That does require a resource and it requires an expertise, and the Home Secretary, myself as Security Minister, and all of the government will work to make sure that our security services have the resources they need to do the job.
Boris Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful for this urgent question, and I thank the Minister for what he said, in particular about the Defending Democracy Task Force. But I wonder if the Minister can assure me as well that not only will the government do all it can to secure our national security, but that with respect to the activities of individuals with known links to the Chinese government and who are considered to be a national security risk, that the fullest of investigations will be done in order to ensure the integrity of our national security.
Mr. Speaker, I can give the honourable member that assurance.
Chris Law.
Mr. Speaker, the United Front Work Department is said to have 40,000 members globally, and Mr. Iain Tengbo is surely the tip of the iceberg in the UK. They're not only tasked with cultivating relationships with high-level figures that extending influence to British nationals, but in all walks of society. That means the public need to be much more aware of the risk to themselves. So I wanted to ask very specifically, what is the Minister doing to assess the numbers of members in our society, and what public awareness campaign are you going to make for my constituents of Dundee and also across these islands?
Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable member makes an important point about public awareness, and I will take that away and give it further consideration. But with regard to the remarks that he made at the beginning, I think what he has done essentially is underline the importance of why we do need the first scheme. As I've said a number of times before, the government are committed to implementing the scheme. We're getting on, and we will implement it in the new year.
John Slinger.
Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the somewhat chiding tone of some of the comments from honourable members opposite, does the Security Minister agree with me that it is actually possible to both maintain a consistent and long-term relationship with China, as we must, but also to take the robust measures that he has set out today to defend our national interests?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do agree with the honourable gentleman, and that is the challenge for any government, regardless of political stripe. Yes, of course, national security is the priority, and we have to defend against the threats that we face. But we also have to cooperate economically, and this government will seek to balance those two responsibilities.
Mr. Speaker, the Security Minister mentions the breadth of the national security threat against the United Kingdom. He mentions Russia, he mentions China, he mentions Iran, but unless I missed it, he didn't mention North Korea, and I wonder whether you make a comment on that. And following on from my right honourable friend, the member for Harwich and North Essex, on the issue of resources, is the Minister confident that the UK intelligence community across the agencies has sufficient resources to manage the increased threat that he has recognised in this chamber today?
The right honourable gentleman, I know, speaks with real experience and authority on these matters, and he's right to raise the issue of North Korea. In terms of the point he made about resources, I'm not remotely complacent about this at all. Mindful of the nature of the threat that we face, the Home Secretary and I will work with our colleagues across government to ensure that our security services do have the resources they need. We have exceptional people stepping forward to serve, and it is the responsibility of government, regardless of political colour, to ensure that they have the resources, the technology that they need, not just to keep pace with the threat, but to retain a competitive advantage, and we will make sure that they have the resources to do that.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yang Tengbo is the alleged Chinese spy who's been stalking the corridors of power in our country and rubbing shoulders with royalty, prime ministers and business leaders. Yet his name has been withheld from the great British public. Does the Minister agree with me that it was only withheld to avoid embarrassment of previous prime ministers, business leaders, and was not in the best interests of the British public?
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure the honourable member will acknowledge that I named H6, the individual, that the reason for his initial anonymity was as a result of a court order and was not a decision by the UK government.
Sir Alex Shelbrooke, no less.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the West certainly learnt a lesson when Russia invaded about energy supplies and where it comes from. And I just want to press the Minister, building on what my right honourable friend for Chingford and Woodford Green said, about solar and about renewables, because we are pushing forward in this country, or the government is, with an agenda of pushing quickly towards renewable energy, and yet China manufacture and process a lot of the materials we need. So can I ask the Minister that before we accelerate towards that, that a full assessment is done on the risks that could happen to our energy supply, because that is a crucial piece of our national security.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm genuinely grateful for the points that the Honourable Member has just made. I think he makes some reasonable and constructive points, and of course we will consider them further. I mean, I would say to him, and I know that he will acknowledge this, that there are difficult judgments that have to be made by government about these matters, but I can give him an assurance that we will look at these matters with a clear-headed view about what is in the national interest of our country. But in the end, national security will always prevail.
Speaker, would the Minister agree that it's not just the big schemes that need looking at, it's the small ones too? Elite capture can happen at higher education level and infrastructure level too. Peking University HSBC Business School in Oxford wants to expand. The local planning authority narrowly passed it, and I asked for the last government to call it in. Last week, this government has approved the scheme. This is a mistake. The economic benefit is going to be going to the Chinese Communist Party primarily. So will his department have a word with MHCLG, look at this scheme again, but also what resilience is he offering to local planning authorities on these matters?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for the points that she makes. She's right, it isn't just about the bigger schemes, the smaller schemes are important as well. I think the matter that she referred to essentially was a planning matter, but I will have a look at it further. And in terms of matters relating to higher education, we work closely with colleagues in the Department for Education, and there are mechanisms in place across government where there are concerns that are expressed. We will follow them up.
John Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I acknowledge the transformation in the security threat that's facing this country, and I urge the government to move forward as quickly as they can with the implementation of the first scheme. But I draw the Minister's attention to the website of the US Department of the Treasury, which today gave a readout of the 7th meeting of the Financial Working Group between the US and the People's Republic of China, where an MOU was set out of those discussions in Nanjing. Can I say to the Minister that though it is very uncomfortable, he does everything he can to ensure that we do have a sophisticated relationship with China, and as uncomfortable as it may be, in order to preserve global and financial stability, we need to maintain that relationship in that domain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman, as he always does, has made a very sensible point. I can say to him I haven't yet looked at the US Treasury Department website, but I will look at it and give him an undertaking to report back on it later today. He's right about the sophisticated relationship as he describes it. I can say to him, as someone who knows government well, that these are matters that we take incredibly seriously, and that the National Security Council provides the forum for decision-making across government. A lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of political leadership now goes into ensuring that that is an appropriate forum where collectively we make decisions across government. Some of the decisions are not easy, some of them are more challenging, but we will always seek to do what is in the best interests of our country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has recently put on hold the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act passed last year. Does he feel that that has helped or hindered the work of United Front in our universities, particularly our elite institutions?
I think the Right Honourable Gentleman makes a fair point, and I'm very happy to discuss it with him offline. I mean, I'll look carefully at the suggestion that he has made. I know that it is being considered by colleagues across government, but let me take it away and I'll come back to him.
David Chadwick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. China is clearly trying to infiltrate all areas of UK society. Will the Minister outline what meetings he's having with the Department for Business and Trade to ensure the UK is more economically resilient by strengthening foreign direct investment screening and cyber defences, including a particular focus on increased data transparency requirements?
The honourable member makes an important point, and I can give him the assurance that we are working collaboratively across government, working with colleagues in the Business and Trade Department, but also in the Cabinet Office. I think he mentioned cyber as well. I mean, I can say to him that that is something that we take incredibly seriously. I was recently at the NCSC. They're doing extraordinary work, working with other partners across government, and we are cooperating closely with other government departments, including DCIT, and we are looking at what more we can do to combat that particular threat.
Bradley Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister assure the House that Chinese investments in the UK are properly scrutinised, particularly those that may be used to acquire leverage over UK policy?
Yes, I can give that assurance.
Robin Swan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The original question actually asked about the extent of the United Front Works Department's operations within the United Kingdom. Can I ask the Minister for his assessment and engagement of the work of that department, either with or within the devolved administrations?
The honourable member makes an important point. In terms of the nature of the threat, I'd refer him back to the annual threat lecture that the Director General of MI5 gave back in October. But in terms of the devolved administrations, we work incredibly closely with all of them, and I hope at some point to be visiting his part of the world.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his answers? And the Minister will be aware that I, along with others in this chamber, have spoken on numerous occasions of the feelings of my British passport holders and those of Chinese origin who are my constituents, and the impression that they have and the threats of the Chinese Communist Party. The issues that the Minister has raised are not surprising, but they do remain concerning. So does the Minister agree that inaction is not an option? And how can the Minister provide the security to Chinese nationalists who are British citizens about their safety and security? Those who I've had to report to the PSNN, the part because I was concerned for their safety as they live their lives in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable gentleman has been very consistent in raising this matter previously. Let me give him an absolute assurance that foreign intervention, wherever it comes from, is completely unacceptable, and this government will use all tools at our disposal to combat it. We use the mechanism of the Defending Democracy Task Force, and there is a lot of work going on to look at the issue of transnational repression. So I can assure the honourable member that we take these matters very seriously. But if he has specific concerns that you want to raise with me, I'm always happy to discuss them with him.
Right, that completes the urgent question. We'll let the front benches change over. Right. We now come to the statement. Minister Jim McMahon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I would like to